Hey, welcome back to Rejected Reality, a podcast where I talk about historical romance novels. My name is Erica, and today I'm going to be talking about Tessa Dare's Romancing the Duke. Now, this is the first actual review I have ever published. I often review things to myself or to my roommate who is not a romance novel reader. He does not care about what I have to say. So I thought that I would review this novel for other people and let's see if somebody likes it. Now, this novel came out in 2014, so it's a little bit of an older novel to be reviewing. The reason I chose this novel is I'm part of a lot of Facebook groups that mention Tessa Dare as a comedic romance author, maybe in the same vein as a Julia Quinn. So I chose this novel based on an article that was published, I think, by Oprah magazine, talking about romance novels you should read. So I picked this one because it's by Tessa Dare, and all of the Facebook historical romance groups seem to love her. So I think we need to get the basic premise out of the way before I expand on my opinions. The basic premise is that the main character, Izzy, main male character, Ransom, both have claims on this castle that Ransom has been living in for, I think, about 7 or 8 months. Izzy has claims on the castle because somebody bequeathed it to her. A fan of her father's bequeathed it to her. Now, her father had written a lot of short stories and had a really big following. People loved it. They were like fanatics over it. Ransom has claims on it because it's his property. He had an accident that kept him out of London and out of his affairs, and he was just holed up in this castle because he felt too scarred to go out in public. He had a literal scar on his face, and he was blinded by his accident. So he was not prepared to go out into public. So he was just holed up in this castle. While he was holed up in the castle, his lawyers were trying to get a hold of his assets. So they were making all of these rash decisions and trying to make it look like he was mentally incompetent so they could get his fortune. So one of the things they did was sell that castle to someone else, and then that someone else bequeathed it to Izzy. So that's how they both feel like they have claims on this castle. A series of events unfolds from this. They obviously fall in love. It's a romance novel. They're going to. It's how you get there. That's the fun part. There are some interesting parts to this story. It felt a little too condensed for me to fully get invested in it. Parts felt rushed or underdeveloped. Alright, so there's this kind of a creature called an ermine. Now, I'd never heard of an ermine. I didn't know what it was. I had to look it up. It looks like a rat or a weasel or something. It has one big scene where it bites Ransom on the hand. I thought this weasel or ermine was going to be a bigger part of the story than it was. You really don't hear from this ermine again until ever. I mean, she writes it in as sort of like an afterthought. Oh, and the ermine caught rats at the end. So it kind of felt like, what's the point? I guess it does play a role. It gives us a look into Izzy's character as to how she's people-pleased her whole life. She didn't want an ermine. She wanted some other animal, but she was gifted an ermine because in the stories that her father wrote, the Izzy Goodnight in those stories had an ermine. So somebody gifted her an ermine and she kept it just to please everyone. Also, another theme throughout this book is that Izzy is not physically an attractive woman. She has really frizzy curly hair and her face is plain. That's how it's explained in the book. Now, since Ransom is blind, Izzy feels comfortable with being herself around him and does not care what she looks like because he can't see her. So she feels comfortable exploring her sexuality. She feels like this is going to be her only opportunity because she feels like she's so ugly. Ransom is obviously having some sort of crisis as well because he's been blinded very recently. I think it was 8 months before we start the story. He was blinded and scarred, and he was still coming to terms with that a little when we start the story. He'd been holed up in that castle No one had really seen or heard from him since the accident. So, and he's also kind of an ass. I don't know if he was an ass before the book started, but when the book started, he was an ass. Izzy has this group of followers that seem to find her wherever she goes. They're cosplayers who come dressed to the nines. They dress like kings. They call themselves the Knights of something. And they have a group of women who are like the handmaidens to the main character in the story. They have fully immersed themselves into this world that her father has created. Now, Izzy doesn't have a problem with these people. They wind up showing up, I think it's about halfway through the book. Now, mind you, Izzy is poor. She's poor. She doesn't have a home. Her father did not write her into the will at all. So all the money that he had made from those stories got passed down to her distant cousin, and her distant cousin had no love for her, kicked her out. So she's poor, and she doesn't really have anything except for the people who love her father's stories. So she embraces them and lets them treat her like the child in the story and not a grown adult that she is, which is a problem for Ransom because he sees her as a woman and not as a child. He wants her to express that she has her own opinions and her own thoughts as an adult woman, and she shouldn't be seen as a small 10-year-old child anymore, which makes complete sense to me. The sex scenes were fine. There weren't too many of them. They were just enough to explain her sexual arc in the story. Really, the only issue that I had was the group of LARPers. I don't know if that's where the comedy was supposed to come from. I don't know if they were written to be comedic relief, but they were just weird. It was not something you expect in a historical romance. If LARPers existed in the 1800s, I was unaware of it. It took me out of the story a little bit that there was just a bunch of people riding around, following Izzy Goodnight around, and they did not realize that she was poor and had nowhere to live. And I guess my bigger issue is if she was so poor and had nowhere to live, why weren't these people who had jobs? It comes out at some point that the main male character in the LARPing group was like a lawyer. He was a lawyer, and it's like, okay, you're a lawyer. And you're smart enough to be a lawyer. You don't realize that this woman doesn't have a home, doesn't have a place to live, and you're not gonna help her in any sort of way. You're just gonna follow her around and declare your devotion or declare your allegiance to her, but you're not going to actually do anything. It just felt so weird to have all these people who loved her, yet she hadn't eaten in 3 days when she showed up at this castle. It just felt so weird. Like it seemed disconnected in a way. It's like, I don't know. I'm not famous. I don't know if you can be poor and penniless and have all these people actually love you and not turn to them and be like, bro, I haven't eaten in a couple of days. Do you think you could buy me a meal instead of maybe following me around everywhere? Like, I'm hungry. I don't know. I'm kind of fat. So my first inclination is to be like, I need to eat. Who can give me a meal? I haven't eaten today and I'm hungry. That's my first inclination. And even if I wasn't a little fat, I'm pretty sure your survival instincts would be like, okay, these people are devoted to my father, therefore now devoted to me since my dad is dead. Maybe they can, help me a little bit, give me employment, help me find employment. I just don't understand how she is so poor and penniless. I mean, I get why she is, but her father had died a couple of months ago at least. I don't understand why she is still penniless and hasn't found a way to help herself. Like, what was she going to do? What was her plan before somebody sent her a message and said, hey, come to this castle? Like, what was her plan? We meet her when she had like 20 cents to her name. What was she about to do? What was her plan? Maybe it's just the planner in me that it's like, what did you plan on doing? What was your goal? Like, what, I guess. All right. So let's move on and talk maybe a little bit more about Ransom and Izzy's relationship and their interactions together. I thought they were really interesting together. I did enjoy their interactions. I thought they were nice together. He's all fucked up from his accident and not being loved as a child. She's all fucked up from not having any food. So, and not being pretty, to be more exact. She's all messed up in the head because she's not pretty, has never been pretty, and all of her father's stories are about a beautiful girl and not about a plain woman. So it makes her a little messed up in the head. Their interactions are good. You know, obviously it's a romance novel, so they do get together in the end. That's no spoiler. You pick up a romance novel, the main male character, the main female character, they're going to get together. There is a couple of spoilers that I could give away that I'm not really going to because A, it doesn't really matter in terms of the plot, and B, why do that? You know, I don't really have a whole lot more to say about it. I think their interactions together are good. In summary, I would say read this book if you want to. If it sounds interesting, read it. I'm not going to tell you to stay far, far away from it. I don't think that that's necessary. If you like Tessa Dare, you'll probably like this, I would assume. I've only read one book of her so far. I am going to read more because I do think she's worth it. I do think that she's good. I don't hate this book. I just don't see myself rereading it again soon, if ever. I may pick it up later just to see if I still stand by my statements. I'm going to wrap it up here. I encourage you to leave a comment. You can even email me. I have an email address. It's called rejectedrealitypod, P-O-D at the end, at gmail.com. So rejectedrealitypod at gmail.com. If you want, definitely email me. I'm doing this podcast just to have actual conversations with someone and not just random interactions on Facebook, which is not my thing. Anyway, I hope you guys have a good day. Bye.